So the topic of this video is actually something that has interested me for a long time. Ever since me and Ita O'Brien, the intimacy coordinator, filmed our interview together, we were discussing about the fact that there are so many conversations about intimacy coordination surrounding the work and filming the project or making the theatre or making the art, but not about the actual casting process and getting cast in these projects that might involve intimacy and what's best practice surrounding that, because so many actors feel such a big pressure to always say yes in a casting process and to seem easy to work with because they want the roles and they want the work, and it's an incredibly competitive industry. So Ita's team very kindly put me in touch with Rose Ryan, the intimacy coordinator, to talk about this topic in more detail. And Rose Ryan is a very experienced and very skilled movement director and also educator. Rose has taught at some of the biggest drama schools in the UK, so it's a real privilege to be able to have this conversation and to talk about this topic that I think it's really important for all actors to really learn about and educate themselves on.
So thank you so much for agreeing to do this. First of all, would you like to introduce a bit about yourself and your practice?
Okay, hi, I'm Rose Ryan, and I am an intimacy coordinator, a movement director, and an educator. And I have been working with movement for 40 years in theatre. And as a movement director, we were often asked to do intimate scenes, and I always hope I kept my actors safe. But in 2016, all things changed with Weinstein, and we started to think more carefully about how we hold intimate scenes, especially within film and TV. I then trained with Ita O'Brien in intimacy on set, and here I am. So fully trained and working in film and telly.
So firstly, I want to ask, when the audition information goes out, what information should be in the brief surrounding intimacy, and how do you then advise actors, if you were to give them advice, on how to decide whether or not that's something they'd be comfortable with doing?
Okay, so two parts to that question. So the first part about how you offer it to an actor through the written word. And I think it's really important to be very straight, very open about what is expected of them. So if it's full frontal nudity, say it's full frontal nudity. What you have to do equally is so being open and transparent about what is expected of the actor in clear anatomical terms is really good, because then they can make their own decision. Also, it might be that the script goes with this, so they get the context of the intimacy, where it takes place, how is it part of the storytelling will be important for the actor. The next step is when you're then being called to audition. There should be no nudity or intimacy in an audition. so so being really clear, although the part involves intimacy, that when you come to audition, that is not going to happen in the audition. For an example of that, I'm just working on a feature at the moment where we've needed 30 naked men to run around in some reeds for a drone shot, and I needed to audition them, and I made it really clear that they would be naturally naked, no sexual content to it, and also in the audition and in all of the rehearsals there is no nudity. So I think there's something here about communication and being really upfront, really clear, using the right kind of language. And how should an actor decide whether to take a part with intimacy on? And I think that is a very individual decision. Each actor will be very different. Read the script fully, understand the context that the intimacy takes place in. Really listen to the body, listen to your nervous system, and notice what your response is to it. Is it something that you feel excited by? Is it something that you want to do? Is it a complete no? And I think it's being really true to yourself and where you are at this moment in your life about whether you take that role or not. And I understand for actors it's difficult, isn't it? Because, we're all wanting the work, we all want that work. But better to say no than do something where you will feel physically compromised. If they take a role where there's a lot of intimacy and they're really uncomfortable with it, the problem is that you can drop out of character because your own feelings and nervous system are going to come to the fore, and then the job becomes difficult and not great for anybody. But the other thing I would say about that, and this is around production companies, is sometimes an actor will discuss what they will do and what they won't do. So they'll say, well, I'll do that, but I won't do this. And I've known production companies come back to me and go, oh, well, we won't have this actor. We'll have this. We'll look for someone else who will do all of this. And I'm like, no, 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 no. Get the right actor for the job. Because from our point of view as intimacy coordinators, there's always a creative solution. We can always find ways round, and often through the process, or if there is a process of rehearsal and getting to know a team, and for an actor, maybe having someone like me as an intimacy coordinator is reassuring, you then find that the actor then might go, actually, I feel more comfortable, and yes, I am able to do that. So we've got two different things here, because you then also have the actors that go, yes, it's fine, I'll do whatever you ask me, and then you get to the shoot and they're like, it's a no. So I think there's something here about consent is fluid and always should be, and we always listen. But right actor for the right job.
Thank you. And then going into any kind of role, every actor will have different levels of experience with intimacy in their own lives, and some may have anxiety surrounding if they have less experience or no experience. So, how do we work with those safely in a way that provides privacy for the actors and their personal lives?
Okay, so the main thing, one of the main things I do is build a relationship with those actors. I talk to them, we do check-ins that are all confidential, and I find out what is, I don't pry because I don't need to know what's going on in their lives or what they've done, but I always ask the question, is there anything that I need to know that will affect your performance or your work here? And then they have choice whether to disclose to me. If they do disclose, it's confidential. The thing with the intimacy work, we try and keep what is personal very separate from what is work. And what we are doing, I mean, in theory, my job's smoke and mirrors. It's not real. There are elements of it that are real, and yeah, it will trigger the nervous system. And a kiss is always a kiss. You can't get around that. But through the process of building a relationship with the actor, building trust, then I can find out and know enough to keep them safe and allow them the space to do what they're good at, which is acting. Does that make sense to you? So what shouldn't happen is all this shouldn't pop up when we're on set and you've got cameras, sound, you've got everybody running around, people have dressed the set, all the makeup's been done, and then suddenly an actor's like, way. That does happen. I'm saying that it does happen.
Yeah.
And usually people are really respectful of that. But all my work is in preparation. It's about building relationship. It's about understanding what is right for the actor, how I can support the actor, and finding solutions if I need to. I mean, an example of it is another feature I was working on. We were working with very young actors. They were under 16, and one was actually 14 and required to kiss one of the other actors who was 16, who was 15, actually. I'm not sure my ages. But in confidence, she told me she'd never been kissed. And I was like, do you know what? Your first kiss should not be the screen kiss. And so I talked with the director and we found ways, we're very good with camera angles nowadays. We find ways to change it and so that actor has not been compromised.
Do you think then that people's first experiences with certain like kissing shouldn't be on camera?
Not you. It's again, it's dependent on the actor, and every situation is different. I would, if it was my daughter, I'd rather the first kiss was someone they really fancied and you wanted to spend some time with, and they built a relationship with. That would be as a mother, that would be my ideal. There's no shoulds. there's only what's right. But with a young actor like that, I didn't think she should have her first kiss as a screen kiss.
Okay, thank you. And then when you're exploring these relationships that could be intimate in a project and a chemistry read, what's the appropriate guidelines with that?
Again, I think any intimacy should be really limited. I'm not entirely convinced that you should just throw. We do in television, we do often quite just throw people together, but there's a process and there are guidelines for the way that we do that. So the same in a chemistry read, it's the same basic principles. Take someone with you. So there's a third person present who can speak for you. Um, open and transparent communication, consent and agreement with all things. And I don't think there should be any kissing. I don't think that's a good way of finding out if there's chemistry between people. I think the way we find chemistry between people is games. How do two people play together? How do they dance together? Just having a bit of a laugh and going through the scene. Certainly should be no nudity in a chemistry. And there are other ways to find chemistry between people. People like to be with each other. We don't need to go into touch and intimacy to read chemistry in bodies. I mean, we're reading bodies all day, every day. That would be my advice. If I know for actors it has happened, if you are asked to do an intimacy, some kind of intimacy in a chemistry call, make sure you've got someone with you. There should be an IC present if that is the case. And things like nothing should be filmed. You have to take particular care. So everyone's slightly different, but my baseline is we can find out chemistry without intimacy if we need to do that.
Thank you. And then how do we combat the power imbalance? Because I know lots of actors feel the pressure to always say yes in an audition process. So what do
Yeah.
we do?
Okay. That the power dynamic is a big one, and that's hopefully where my role as an intimacy coordinator and other people like me are. We're trying to change the industry. What we want is an industry that is consent aware and is really takes that into auditions. So that also involved training our young actors to be able to say no, or to give our yeses freely, to be unsure. I think the industry has to shift. That means the way we train actors has to shift. In an audition, I always state right from the outset, that if something is not right, you have the opportunity to leave. You potentially set up a safe word and an action that people can use. But it's more complex than that. It's about the whole psychology about we need the work. I don't want to be seen to be a problem, as I hear from actors a lot. What I would say is no is a gift, guys. It really is. No is a gift. Yes is given. And then maybe if we're working quickly, a maybe is still a no. I'm interested in this maybe area where consent can be a bit more fluid, but in an audition situation when we're working quickly, we're short of time, we're maybe seeing a lot of people. If it's a maybe, it's a no. So, consent needs to be freely given and it can be changeable at all times, but I'm not sure I've got the answers to say how we get actors to do that. They have to find that confidence in themselves. Some of it is how we set up the environment of the audition. I always send out letters beforehand. I always have a contact number if they need to talk about things. So the more information you have in advance, the better the decision you can make in the moment.
I think that's really important because I think I had an audition recently where I got given the sides on the day and it wasn't what I was expecting. And I think being able to be informed is important.
Yeah. And particularly with intimacy, because it does work slightly differently. And you probably know this as an actor. And when you read a script and there's a bit of intimacy in it, it's like, bing. And then you can go through the whole rehearsal process and it's there. waiting until the director addresses it.
What would you consider to be intimacy? Because would you consider like innuendo or like reference to intimacy or like flirting with the audience, that kind of thing? Is that
Yeah.
considered intimacy?
Yeah, intimacy is massive. We're intimate all the time. Intimacy starts with the gaze, the way we look at people. The way the gaze rests on people's bodies. It's and also language. This can be very intimate and very sexual as well. So I think it's a negotiation, and it depends on who you're working with. I'm working with a director at the moment where actually I collaborate with her, which is a very different relationship in film than we normally have. And it means that I can play with all the gaze and the flirting and the way I'm always interested in the way two actors, or two bodies cross the space in between. How do how do people come together, and how do they come into touch? And so yeah, it's all to play for. But you know, what's interesting, because there's another side of this that is the risk assessments and the legalities of the work. If you call everything, so this, I always have that negotiation with the first AD: is it or is it not intimacy? And I think it depends on the actors. It depends on what it's saying in the storytelling. And if I feel the actors are vulnerable, I will call it as a closed set. But I think there is an area where it is fuzzy, and I think we have to call that according to each individual situation.
Thank you. And then what options do you have as an actor if someone who is cast or someone who you might have met within the audition process that you might play an intimate relationship with, if they make you feel uncomfortable or unsafe, how do you approach that?
Again, it depends on your relationship with the production team. If you're a number one cast and you say it will get sorted, I've had that happen. The and because if you leave it, you can't do your job. So it's a fine, because we mustn't discriminate against people either. So it's a very fine line. But again, it's open and transparent communication. And I think if you feel uncomfortable about something, you have to really look as to why, and what that is, and find a way to express it in a really professional way. So it's not tittle tattle, it's not petty, and it's not personally vindictive and malicious. You have to really examine why you need to say that. But equally, you need to follow your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, the chances are it's not right. And the sooner the production know about that, the sooner we can sort it. And then, because what we're always doing is mitigating problems when we're filming, because that can't happen ideally because too much money involved. Yeah, difficult, very difficult, but I think we're all responsible to speak out now. We have to call it if it's something is wrong or not right. And I will do that. If I see someone behaving in an audition badly, I will call it and ask them to leave. And I have done that as well. If they're using wrong language or using over sexualized language, or had one actor going down the route of, it was almost like a carry-on film for them. And I was like, actually, that's not what we're doing. I'm really sorry. You might just need to leave the room. So hard, not an easy thing to do, but all of us are responsible for this within the workplace, to create a consent-aware workplace where everyone, and that's crew and actors, feel safe. And in auditions, it's the same thing.
And with group auditions, where it's a workshop-based audition, some of the exercises or material might involve physical contact and might not be known of before the day. So how should you work with that, and what's the best practice for these kind of things?
Again, it's how you set up the room. I'm a movement director. I'm also a contact improv practitioner, so I work with a lot of touch. So there are times when I do use touch and contact, but there's ways and means of doing it. You have to do it through a consent-based process. That's what you have to do. You have to give people choice. And if it doesn't suit them, you have to give them alternatives. So, generally in an audition, people know what they're going to be doing. So at the beginning, I would talk about, sorry, I didn't get an opportunity to send this to you, but we're going to be doing some very simple consent work using hands, and you might be required to hold hands. And again, I always front it so that give people the option to step away. You've also got the option of I always say, if you need to leave the room, give me a double thumbs up. Um, if you run out crying, someone will come after you. We it's the way you set up the room is the way that it will run. But giving people choice and of what is expected of them gives them the ability to consent openly and freely, or to give really firm, clear no's, or to maybe and see how it goes, but then step into either the no or the yes. But I think we are responsible as practitioners, to set up those rehearsal rooms or those audition spaces really clearly, really well. And also, I always think auditions are a two-way process. It's like, I want to offer to the people who come to my audition, I want them to go away going, oh, well, I learned something there. I took something away from that, as much as I found the people I need for the job. Now, I know not everybody works in that way, but for me, those things are important. It's a two-way process in audition. It's as much for the actor to go, yeah, I love this company, I want to work for them, or no, I don't want to work for them. And it's for us to go, yeah, this is the right person for the role, or no, not right for this role, but be great if you could come back for this one in the afternoon. So yeah, really thinking of auditions as two-way processes. But if there's any touch or contact in the audition, that it's again upfront, the way the room's set up from the beginning, and that it's structured clearly and held well so people can have freedom of consent.
So people can step out. Because I know I've done workshop auditions before where it's one person from each side of the circle walks into the space and then they touch a body part and someone else touches a body part, and then you negotiate with consent with eye contact. Is that something that you
Yeah.
do, or do you think it needs to be verbal?
No, I think so. One of the things that interests me about consent is, consent is not just verbal. It's about how we read the body. And, you know, if I wouldn't randomly ask people to touch body parts. That's not something I would personally do.
Mm.
I can understand the coming across the circle, but I would say maybe lay a hand on I'd be really specific
Yeah.
about where you place that touch. It's because it's the randomness that sets up the anxiety.
Yes.
But I think one of the things that's interesting in an exercise like that is getting people to begin to read. So the thing with consent and non-verbal consent is noticing. So we notice and then we action. Now, if we can notice in ourselves, then we can notice in another. So if you came to put a hand on me and I could see that you were like nervous, I would go, this needs to stop. Yeah, because I'm reading your body language. So a lot of what I do as a coordinator is I read people's body language, because it's too easy. Words are great and when freely given, but quite often it's more complex, but the body often doesn't lie. There's this, isn't there? There's yeah, it's yeah, I'll do that. And I'm going, really? It's like, because it's all closed off and that they're giving me a no sign in their body, but they're going, yeah, I'll do that. Yeah, I can't comment on that walking across the circle because it doesn't sound like something I would do. But I have used a lot of touch in workshops. I freely admit it, because I'm really interested in developing non-verbal consent. But I tend to do it in a really structured way. And if that was well structured, I wouldn't have a problem with it.
Then when do intimacy coordinators often get involved first in a project, and what happens initially? after the casting when all these conversations happen with the actors?
Okay, so that's a long question.
Long question.
Ideally, I'd like to get right involved right from the script development, right from the beginning. So the feature I'm working on at the moment, I've been working with the writer and the director quite a long way back, because the intimacy is part of the storytelling. It's an important part of the storytelling, and they want to get it right. And so that's been really exciting for me. This is unusual. Usually we're just, people have forgotten to call us and they bring us in. That happens too. So the ideal is as early as possible, because then I can negotiate with the actors with something we call riders, nudity riders, that are attached to contracts, which outline clearly what their expectation is of what body parts they were willing to show, not show, so every one of those will be slightly different. Once casting's complete, then my work begins with the check-ins. That's the big thing. It's all in the preparation. Lots of check-ins with the actors. Some need more than others. Some actors don't like you to be too hands-on. They, especially older actors, they're really good at this work. They don't need me to helicopter them, going, "Are you all right?" every 5 minutes. Then sometimes I just keep in touch by WhatsApp. Ideally, we have rehearsals. That's the big thing. So when we rehearse, what we do is we create a container for the work to happen in, because that container I write up and that goes into the risk assessment. So it doesn't mean that actors have to do absolutely that. They have to get as close to that as they can. But what it does is gives them a container in which they can bring the character and the acting to. Because a lot of actors that I've met they're very quiet in rehearsal. They just quietly map it, and then you put them in front of the camera and they bring all their craft to bear and their understanding of technique, camera technique. But as long as we've got that container, then the scene partners and the other people involved are safe. Then the actors can fly and they produce extraordinary work. I'll always check in with them at the end of the scene. I'll be on set with them. I'll be helping with the closed set, making sure monitors are off. Nobody's taking still pictures. That's the other thing. And I just advocate for the actors. But what I don't want to do is get away in the way of the actors' process. Because there's a lot being asked of them when they're on a film. They often in the chair doing makeup for an hour, and then having to, stay in character. So they don't need me chit-chatting to them all the time. So, but then, like I say, every actor's different. Some actors will need more support and some will need less. So it's really about tailoring the job to the people you work with. I do follow up. I write follow-up reports. And if somebody is a bit wobbly, I do take the time out to sit and talk things through. Then, if it's something I can't cope with, I will signpost people to various support. But yeah, it's just sometimes just me being there is enough. They just, because then the crew know, the actors know, and everyone gets on with the job. And it's all about doing a good job. We do the best job we can within the time we've got given, and we do it as professionally and as clearly as we can. So that's what I'm trying to do, but using consent at all times.
Thank you. I think that's very important. And finally, do you have any advice or further things that you think people should be aware of regarding auditions and intimacy?
I think my big thing is listen to what is right for you. If something feels odd or wrong, it is. And I know it feels awful to say no to something, but there'll be something else, but do not put yourself in a position of vulnerability just for the work, and when in doubt, ask for an IC to be present. I always happily come in and stand alongside someone at an audition if you need me. But yeah, listen to what is right for you and follow it through.
Okay, thank you so much for taking the time to speak to me about this.
Great. No, I've loved it. I'm always happy to talk intimacy.
So thank you so much again to Rose for taking the time to speak to me and to film this. I really do appreciate it. And the link to Rose's website and Rose's work will be linked to below. And I genuinely feel so grateful to have the opportunity to have these conversations and to discuss these things. And Rose is so experienced in the industry, and I feel like this conversation was something that I found really inspiring and gave me a lot to think about. And I feel like having these conversations and filming these interviews is something that really shapes my mindset and the way I approach the industry and think about the industry moving forward. So I'm so grateful to have had the opportunity to talk to Rose about this topic. I think it's really important that we talk about these topics and that we all learn and equip ourselves with this knowledge in order to keep ourselves safe, and in order to also make sure we're creating exciting storytelling and work. So I think it's such an interesting topic as intimacy coordination. So thank you so much to everyone for watching as well. Stay tuned for more interviews coming soon.